charged me rent for my own house, so I sold it to a Megacorp 71 years. That is exactly how long it takes to learn that the crimson blood flowing steadily through your own fragile veins can spontaneously turn to solid, unforgiving ice. It does not happen all at once. It creeps in, a slow, insidious chill that starts deep within the marrow and works its way outward until your entire existence feels frozen, brittle, and impossibly cold. I spent 40 arduous years as a structural and civil engineer, meticulously building colossal foundations meant to withstand devastating earthquakes, howling hurricane storms, and the relentless, grinding weight of unforgiving time. I poured my sweat and blood into the concrete of this city. I designed the massive, towering steel trusses of the Miller Bridge, calculating the exact tensile strength needed to hold thousands of commuting vehicles suspended high above the dark, churning river below. I oversaw the deep, cavernous excavations for the Sterling Building, ensuring the bedrock anchors would never yield to the monumental sheer forces of nature. I knew exactly how to calculate intricate load-bearing limits with absolute, uncompromising precision. I knew precisely how much intense, crushing pressure a steel-reinforced concrete structure could take before it inevitably fractured and cracked under the immense strain. My entire professional life was defined by predictability, by mathematics, by the reassuring certainty of physics. Every single equation balanced, every solitary stress test yielded an expected rational result. But despite all those decades of rigorous study and practical application, I never once calculated the invisible breaking point of my very own family. I never anticipated the profound, silent structural failure of my own flesh and blood. I never realized that a foundation built on love could simply crumble into dust. The sprawling 4-bedroom house is excruciatingly quiet in the early pre-dawn mornings, save for the low, monotonous mechanical hum of the aging refrigerator in the kitchen. For decades, this home used to be filled to the brim with the sweet, intoxicating scent of Beatrice's favorite lilac and jasmine perfume. It used to echo warmly with the gentle melodic sound of her soft humming as she went about her daily routines, tending to her vibrant garden and baking fresh bread. But my beautiful, radiant Bea has been completely gone for 5 agonizing years now. Pancreatic cancer took her swiftly, quietly, and with a ruthless efficiency that left me entirely shattered. It was a vicious, silent thief in the night, stealing the light from her eyes and the warmth from her hands over the course of 3 brutal months. I spent countless sleepless nights sitting rigidly in uncomfortable, sterile hospital chairs, listening to the rhythmic, soulless beeping of the cardiac monitors, watching the woman I loved slowly fade into a fragile, translucent ghost of her former self. When she finally took her last struggling breath, she left me utterly alone in this massive, echoing house that we had proudly paid off more than 15 years ago, a testament to our shared frugality and unwavering partnership. It immediately transformed from a vibrant, living home into a dark, hollow mausoleum of memories. When she finally passed away on a rainy Tuesday morning, our only daughter, Megan, came to me with large, shimmering crocodile tears welling in her eyes. She and her fiercely arrogant husband, Travis, were supposedly struggling financially. They desperately needed a comfortable place to stay, supposedly just for a little while, so they could save up enough money to get back on their own 2 feet. Because I deeply loved my only daughter, and because I was blinded by the fresh, suffocating fog of profound grief, I desperately wanted to help her in any way I possibly could. I generously gave them the sprawling master bedroom, the very sanctuary I had intimately shared with my beloved Bea for 40 years, and I quietly moved my entire life into the small, cramped, 10-by-10 guest room situated at the very end of the dim hallway. 5 long, excruciating years later, that temporary little while has permanently mutated into a hostile, parasitic occupation. Megan now works in corporate human resources, though she clearly possesses absolutely zero genuine humanity. She is 32 years old, thoroughly dripping with unearned entitlement and toxic narcissism. She has evolved into a cold, calculating woman who looks at me not as a loving, devoted father who sacrificed everything for her, but rather as an annoying, rapidly depreciating asset occupying valuable real estate. Her tailored designer suits and aggressive phone calls constantly pollute the peaceful atmosphere of my home. And then, of course, There is Travis. He is 35 years old, entirely unemployed for the last 2 of those years, and sickeningly, fiercely proud of his own profound laziness. He aggressively calls himself a visionary entrepreneur and a savvy crypto investor. In harsh reality, he is nothing more than a pathetic, blood-sucking parasite permanently wearing a backwards, stained baseball cap. He spends his miserable days sitting in front of a massive, obnoxious bank of glowing monitors, furiously typing away while watching highly volatile digital numbers plummet into the red. The constant, irritating whir of his oversized cooling fans and the foul, stale odor of cheap energy drinks and unwashed clothes constantly bleed out from the living room, contaminating the entire house. He siphons the remaining life and resources out of this once happy home while contributing absolutely nothing of value to society or this family. He talks loudly on his headset for hours on end, boasting to anonymous internet strangers about imaginary fortunes and impending financial revolutions, completely oblivious to the pathetic irony of his situation. His existence is a towering monument to modern mediocrity and shameless, unabashed freeloading. He is a termite, slowly and systematically eating away at the sturdy wood of my life's work. Over these agonizingly long years, a highly dangerous, incredibly toxic assumption slowly took firm root in both of their greedy, corrupted minds, because I never aggressively shoved the legal property deed in their smug faces, and because I quietly, passively retreated to my small, shadowy room and graciously let them completely take over all the main living spaces. They genuinely began to believe that this magnificent house was entirely theirs. They treated me like a burdensome tenant, an unwanted ghost haunting their primary residence. I saw the sinister transformation happening right before my tired eyes. I felt the subtle tectonic shift in their behavior and attitudes. But I was physically exhausted. I was mentally drained. I was still profoundly grieving the devastating loss of my beloved wife. I let it slide, choosing the path of least resistance. Until last night, I was sitting quietly in the dimly lit kitchen, slowly nursing a steaming cup of bitter black coffee, minding my own business, when they suddenly ambushed me like cowardly predators. Travis violently slapped a crisp, stark white sheet of printer paper directly onto the polished oak dining table, the very same sturdy table I had painstakingly built with my own 2 calloused hands over 3 decades ago. Megan stood rigidly beside him, her thin arms tightly crossed over her chest, wearing the identical cold, emotionless corporate expression she probably utilized when heartlessly firing struggling single mothers at her ruthless firm. "What exactly is this?" I asked, my voice rumbling low and gravelly, betraying absolutely none of the sudden tension coiling in my gut. "It is a formal notice of rent adjustment, Dad," Megan stated flatly, deliberately refusing to meet my piercing gaze. "The overall cost of living is rapidly going up everywhere. $500 a month simply is not cutting it anymore. We need more." I slowly lowered my coffee cup and stared intently at the offending paper. Notice of rent adjustment. The bold, aggressive black font demanded an outrageous $1,500 every single month. "My monthly Social Security check is exactly $1,800, Megan," I said, my tone remaining deadly, terrifyingly calm, even though a violent, subterranean tremor of pure, distilled, white-hot rage began to vibrate intensely within my chest cavity. "That is really not our problem, Harold," Travis aggressively chimed in, leaning his upper body obnoxiously over the beautiful oak table, loudly chewing a piece of cheap mint gum with a sickening, wet smack. He intentionally never called me Dad. He never showed an ounce of respect. The current market rate for a decent room in this upscale neighborhood is easily at least $2,000. We are generously giving you a substantial family discount. But if you cannot pay the new rate, we are going to have to forcefully convert your bedroom into a dedicated VR game room and home gym. I desperately need the extra square footage for my new Twitch streaming setup and workout equipment. They were actually threatening to legally evict me from my very own property. They maliciously wanted to violently strip away my final, tiny sanctuary simply to make room for a grown, pathetic man's childish video games and exercise gear. I slowly turned my head and looked deeply at my daughter. My mind instantly flashed back to the sweet, innocent little girl I had patiently taught to ride a bicycle on the concrete driveway I had poured myself. I vividly remembered the joyful, laughing girl I had proudly carried on my broad shoulders at the crowded summer county fair. I searched her eyes, looking for any trace of that child. But there was absolutely nothing left of her in the hardened, greedy woman standing defiantly before me. Just pure, unadulterated greed, cold, naked, calculating greed. I see, I said simply, my voice barely above a whisper. I did not yell. I did not violently throw the insulting paper back in their arrogant faces. An experienced civil engineer never screams pointlessly at a collapsing, failing steel bridge. He coldly and methodically analyzes the underlying structural failure and begins formulating a comprehensive plan to dismantle it safely. The new rent is strictly due on the 1st of the month, Dad, Megan said sharply, abruptly turning on her designer heel and marching out of the room like a dictator. They casually walked away, completely leaving me alone in the dim, flickering light of the silent kitchen. They foolishly thought I was just a weak, broken, senile old man whom they could easily bully and intimidate into pathetic submission. They tragically forgot that I spent my entire adult life breaking solid granite rock, moving massive quantities of earth, and constructing things that survive devastating impacts. The sheer disrespect did not miraculously end there. It rapidly escalated the very next morning, cementing my newfound resolve. Those old books were my entire life's work. They were rare, irreplaceable first editions, filled with meticulous handwritten notes from decades of complex, dangerous projects, the literal blueprints of my entire successful career. I had carefully preserved the original, hand-drawn schematics for the downtown water treatment facility, a project that had saved the city from a catastrophic drought. The margins were covered in my scrawled equations, late-night epiphanies, and the accumulated wisdom of a man who actually knew how to build things that endured. And this worthless parasite wanted to casually toss them in the trash for a stupid treadmill he would probably use exactly twice, for abandoning it to collect dust in a forgotten corner. It was not merely an insult to me, it was a profound insult to a lifetime of genuine, grueling labor and tangible, lasting accomplishment. Travis was lazily standing by the expensive blender, wearing baggy, stained gray sweatpants and a tight, filthy white tank top that highlighted his pathetic physique. In his right hand was a ceramic coffee mug, but it was not just any random mug from the cupboard. It was my precious 25th anniversary mug, the exact one Beatrice had specially custom-made for me all those years ago. It featured a slightly faded, cherished photograph of us, smiling brightly from our unforgettable honeymoon trip to the rocky coast of Maine, printed delicately on the side. I kept that specific mug pushed carefully to the very back of the highest top cabinet, entirely out of sight and out of reach. I absolutely never used it for drinking. I only gently took it down and looked at it when I desperately needed to clearly remember the radiant warmth of her beautiful smile. Travis casually brought the sacred mug to his chapped lips and loudly slurped a thick, disgusting green sludge from it, completely oblivious to the monumental desecration he was committing. My rough, calloused knuckles instantly turned bone-white as I furiously gripped the wooden doorframe. The solid timber actually groaned audibly under the immense, crushing pressure of my sudden, violent grip. "Good morning," Harold Travis mumbled incoherently, lazily wiping a thick smear of the green sludge from his upper lip with the back of his unwashed hand. "Listen, man, I really need you to completely clear out all your useless junk from the garage later today." "My junk?" I echoed, my voice sounding dangerously soft like the quiet hiss of a lit fuse. "Yeah, exactly, your dusty old books. All those outdated engineering manuals taking up the entire back wall. My brand new, top-of-the-line treadmill is getting delivered tomorrow afternoon, and I absolutely need that prime space. If you do not box them all up and get them out of there by tonight, I am just throwing them straight into the neighborhood dumpster. Those old books were my entire life's work. They were rare first editions, filled with meticulous handwritten notes from decades of complex, dangerous projects, the literal blueprints of my entire successful career. And this worthless parasite wanted to casually toss them in the trash for a stupid treadmill he would probably use exactly twice before abandoning it. I stared intently at the disgusting smudge of green smoothie currently defiling Beatrice's smiling, beautiful face on the side of the mug. I did not say a single word in response. I simply turned around and walked calmly back to my small, cramped room. The heavy, suffocating sadness was completely gone now. The crippling grief that had mercilessly weighed me down for 5 long years instantly evaporated into the ether, entirely replaced by a cold, sharp, brilliantly calculating clarity. They had made a massive, utterly fatal miscalculation. They foolishly assumed the bedrock foundation of this family was theirs to carelessly demolish for their own selfish gain. But they did not own the intricate blueprints, and they most certainly did not legally or morally own this house. I slowly sat down on the edge of my small, creaking twin bed, pulled out a fresh yellow legal pad from the drawer of the nightstand, grabbed my heavy silver pen, and systematically began to draft a brilliant new plan. A spectacular, devastating demolition of my own. The thud was sickening, a heavy, hollow sound of something precious hitting concrete. It echoed through the musty, dimly lit expanse of the garage, vibrating against the corrugated aluminum siding. It was a sound that carried the distinct weight of desecration, a blunt impact that rattled the dust motes, dancing lazily in the slanted afternoon sunlight. I was walking toward the garage to inspect the oil pan on my 1969 Mustang when I heard it. The air out there always smelled faintly of motor oil, old pine sawdust from long-abandoned woodworking projects, and the dried lavender Beatrice used to hang from the exposed rafters. That scent was my sanctuary, a time capsule of better days, of sweat and honest labor. Beatrice had insisted on the lavender, claiming it cut through the grease and grime, leaving a trail of the garden she loved so much. But as I opened the creaking side door, its heavy metal hinges protesting with a shrill whine, that comforting smell was violently pierced by the sharp chemical stench of heavy-duty garbage bags. The kind they use on massive construction sites to haul away shattered drywall and twisted rebar. Megan was standing directly in the center of the garage, illuminated by the harsh overhead fluorescent light. At her feet, a thick, black contractor bag lay open like a gaping maw, a dark abyss swallowing the remnants of a life she deemed entirely obsolete. She was holding Structural Dynamics in Earthquake Engineering, a pristine first edition I'd had since 1982, the dark blue spine worn from the thousands of hours I'd spent poring over it under the harsh, unyielding glare of a drafting lamp. That book had guided my hand when I designed the foundation of the West Coast Metro Tower, back when my mind was sharp and my back was strong. It held my marginalia, my intricate calculations, the literal, undeniable blueprint of my professional existence. She didn't place it gently in the bag. She didn't drop it with careless indifference. She threw it, thud. "What the hell are you doing?" The words slipped out of me, low and dangerous, scraping against the dry walls of my throat like rusted iron. I hadn't used that specific tone since my days managing roughneck foremen on the suspension bridge projects in the early 90s. It was the voice of a man who commanded steel and concrete, a man who brokered no insolence and tolerated absolutely no foolishness. Megan jumped, startled, dropping a stack of delicate, hand-drawn drafting schematics onto the oil-stained concrete floor. She quickly recovered her composure, her initial shock morphing almost instantly into that familiar, venomous irritation that had become her default expression whenever she looked at me. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly, her dark eyes narrowing as she glared at me, seeing not a father who had sacrificed his prime for her comfort, but a burdensome squatter infringing upon her pristine domain. "I'm clearing this junk out," she stated firmly, aggressively brushing her manicured hands against the smooth, synthetic fabric of her expensive designer yoga pants. "Travis needs the space for the new treadmill. We told you this morning, Dad, you need to pull your weight around here, or make room for people who do." I took a slow, deliberate step forward, the thick rubber soles of my heavy work boots grinding against the gritty, unswept floor. My eyes shifted from the heavy black bag of my life's work, my legacy unceremoniously discarded like common refuse, to the sleek, midnight blue curves of the Mustang parked in the shadowed corner. Beatrice and I had restored that magnificent machine over the course of 3 painstaking years. Every single bolt, every inch of distressed leather interior, we'd polished it together, our hands covered in dark grease, our shared laughter echoing in this very room, bouncing off the walls that now felt like a prison. It was the only tangible thing I had left in this world that still held her fingerprints, the faint echo of her vanilla perfume lingering tenaciously in the upholstery. Megan tracked my gaze, her eyes cold and calculating, and crossed her arms tightly over her chest defensively. "And while we're on the subject of space, we've made a decision about the car." I repeated quietly, my voice dropping an octave, resonating with a barely suppressed, volcanic fury. The sheer audacity of the pronoun hung in the stagnant air like a foul, suffocating odor. "Yes, Travis knows a guy, a collector from out of state. He can get $20,000 for it in cash by the weekend. We'll take $15,000 for the back rent you owe us, and you can keep the $5,000 to find a little apartment somewhere. Maybe something closer to the city, something more your speed." A cold, biting wind seemed to blow straight through the center of my chest, instantly freezing the blood in my veins. Back rent, her car, the concepts were so profoundly alien, so deeply twisted and vile, that for a fraction of a second, my logical mind refused to process them. This was the house I had purchased, with the sweat of my brow and the ache in my bones. It was the home where I had raised her, where her mother had taken her final ragged breath in the master bedroom they now occupied. Now, she was charging me extortionate rent for a small, damp guest room, treating me like a delinquent tenant who was continually behind on payments. She stepped boldly over my scattered books, the heavy heel of her bright white sneaker thoughtlessly crushing a loose page of foundational calculations, closing the distance between us. Her face was a mask of absolute unyielding entitlement, devoid of even a trace of filial piety. "So, here is the final deal. You clear out the rest of this useless moldy paper, and you sign the title of the Mustang over to Travis by Saturday morning. Or you get out. We are completely done subsidizing your extended retirement." She didn't blink. There was absolutely no hesitation in her stare, no flicker of the sweet, innocent little girl who used to sit securely on my lap and ask me how towering buildings stood up so tall against the furious wind. The daughter Beatrice and I had raised with boundless love, endless patience, and unwavering devotion was entirely, unequivocally gone. In her place stood a parasite, a remorseless entity standing arrogantly in a house she didn't own, threatening to sell a beloved car she didn't buy, to fund a lavish, superficial lifestyle she didn't earn. The pain of the profound betrayal should have crushed me completely. It should have brought me to my weak knees, weeping uncontrollably for the tragic loss of my only child, for the absolute corruption of her once bright soul. For 5 agonizing years, I had shrunk my entire life down to a single claustrophobic guest room just to give her a massive head start in life. I had eaten cheap, tasteless, microwavable meals in silence, stayed entirely out of their way, swallowed every insult, every sigh, every petty grievance, all because she was Beatrice's blood. I had endured the constant, grinding disrespect because I believed, naively and stupidly, that underneath the suffocating layers of selfishness, there was still a tiny shred of the family we used to be. But as I looked at her now, watching her actively sneer at the very books that had funded her expensive college degree, the pain simply vanished. It evaporated instantly, like morning mist under a scorching, unforgiving sun, leaving behind a profound, crystalline emptiness in the center of my being. And then, a quiet, meticulously calculating rage filled the dark void. It wasn't a hot, explosive anger that screamed and raged. It was a cold, methodical fury, the kind of rage that patiently builds empires from dust and systematically levels impassable mountains. They didn't see a father. They saw a carcass to be picked aggressively clean, a vast resource to be endlessly mined, until nothing remained but bleached bone and empty pockets. "Saturday," I said softly, the single word tasting like dry ash and bitter rust in my mouth. "Saturday," she confirmed, a smug, triumphant little smile playing at the corners of her perfectly painted mouth, completely, blissfully oblivious to the massive tectonic shift that had just occurred in the very foundation of her precarious world. I didn't argue, I didn't yell, scream, or demand the respect I was rightfully owed. I simply turned my broad back on her, the heavy leather of my work jacket creaking loudly in the oppressive silence, and walked deliberately back into the house, leaving my life's work scattered and broken on the cold, unforgiving concrete. The living room aggressively reeked of sour sweat. Travis was sprawled heavily across the expensive, cream-colored sofa I had purchased, a massive blinking VR headset firmly strapped to his face. He was shouting frantically into a boom microphone attached to the side, his voice a grating whine about crypto miners, lag spikes, and kill-to-death ratios, his pale fingers frantically mashing the colorful buttons on a neon-lit controller. He was a pathetic caricature of a man, a bloated leech, clinging desperately to the success of others, utterly devoid of ambition, honor, or respect. He didn't even notice me as I walked up to the edge of the sofa, my towering shadow falling dark across his flaccid, prone form. I dropped slowly to one knee, completely ignoring the sharp stabbing protest of my aging, work-worn joints. Beneath the old upholstery, carefully hidden in a surgically sliced slit, in the thick fabric that Beatrice and I had made over a decade ago, during a paranoid weekend discussing emergency preparedness and worst-case scenarios, was a concealed, reinforced compartment. My calloused, scarred fingers blindly traced the familiar, rough edge of the synthetic fabric, slipping smoothly inside the dark recess to grasp the smooth, thick plastic hidden within. I pulled it out into the dim light, a dusty dark blue legal folder. It felt incredibly heavy in my worn hands, representing a dense, localized concentration of immense power and severe consequence. It contained the original deeds, the ironclad irrevocable trusts, the ruthless contingency plans drafted meticulously by high-priced lawyers who charged exorbitant fees by the minute. It contained the absolute, unyielding kill switch to their entire pathetic, parasitic existence. Travis laughed uproariously at some crass joke his virtual friends had made, completely and utterly oblivious to the terrifying fact that I was presently holding the metaphorical loaded gun that was about to violently end his entire sheltered world. He casually reached over and took a long, deep drag from a sleek vape pen, blowing a thick, noxious cloud of artificial strawberry smoke into the stale air, blissfully unaware that his days of idle leisure were now strictly numbered in mere hours. I stood up slowly, deliberately wiping the accumulated gray dust from the crisp, unbent edges of the folder, and walked with measured, heavy steps back toward the gleaming kitchen. Megan was standing by the massive marble island, casually pouring herself a tall glass of imported, heavily carbonated sparkling water, the clear ice clinking cheerfully and musically against the expensive crystal. I placed the folder firmly under my arm, pressing it tightly against my ribs. "Megan," I said, my voice cutting sharply through the low, ambient hum of the stainless steel refrigerator. She turned quickly, her expression twisting instantly into an ugly, impatient mask of pure annoyance. "What now? I thought we settled this outside. If I walk out that door right now," I began slowly, my voice eerily calm, smooth, and entirely devoid of any lingering fatherly warmth or misplaced affection. "If I pack absolutely nothing, if I leave everything behind, if I just walk away and never return, is that what you truly, genuinely want?" She rolled her eyes dramatically, sighing deeply, as if my very existence was a heavy, unbearable burden placed unfairly upon her delicate shoulders, and set the heavy glass down with a sharp, dismissive clink on the marble countertop. "Oh, stop with the pathetic melodramatics, Dad. Yes, it's exactly what we want. We need our house back. We need the physical space to build our future together. Leave the keys to the Mustang on the counter, on your way out. And don't forget to lock the deadbolt. Our house." The two words hung heavily in the air, a final damning verdict that sealed her fate forever. I looked at her for a long, heavy, utterly silent moment. I meticulously committed every single detail of her arrogant, profoundly ungrateful face to my permanent memory. The slight, haughty flare of her nostrils, the cruel, sharp set of her jaw, the absolute, chilling absence of empathy or remorse in her dark eyes. I wanted to remember exactly, precisely how she looked in her perceived moment of absolute, unquestioned victory, right before the heavy hammer of reality fell and shattered her carefully constructed illusion into a million unrecoverable pieces. "All right," I whispered softly, a solemn promise sealed eternally in blood and concrete. I didn't walk down the hall to the guest room. I didn't pack a single bag. I didn't gather my clothes, my sentimental trinkets, or my basic toiletries. I possessed my worn leather wallet in my right front pocket, the sturdy grease-stained work clothes on my strong back, and the blue legal folder tucked securely under my arm. That was absolutely all the ammunition I needed to completely dismantle the rotten empire of lies they had lazily built upon my aching back. I walked straight out the heavy oak front door and closed it quietly, methodically behind me. The heavy brass deadbolt clicked sharply into place with a loud, final thud, a solid sound that resonated deeply with the absolute finality of a closing, impenetrable steel vault. I walked slowly down the long, winding asphalt driveway, the warm late afternoon sun beating down on the back of my thick neck, casting long, imposing shadows across the lush, manicured lawn I had paid for with my own blood and sweat. I didn't look back at the sprawling, silent house. There was absolutely nothing left in that empty structure for me, only fading ghosts and greedy parasites. I reached deep into my heavy coat pocket, pulled out my encrypted cell phone, and deliberately dialed a highly secure, private number I hadn't called in 5 long, grueling years. It rang exactly twice before a crisp, impeccably professional voice answered instantly, totally devoid of emotion, but absolutely full of lethal, terrifying competence. "Arthur Blackwood, Arthur," I said, my voice as steady, icy cold, and fiercely unyielding as hardened, tempered steel. "It's Harold. It's time to execute the protocol." The mahogany paneling of Arthur Blackwood's law office always smelled of bitter lemon polish, aged parchment, and a certain kind of ruthless, unshakable competence. For 3 decades, this expansive room had been a quiet sanctuary of order in an increasingly chaotic, unpredictable world. Arthur himself was a bulldog of a man, 72 years old, with sharp, discerning eyes that missed absolutely nothing, and a fierce loyalty that belonged exclusively to me and my late wife, Beatrice. He had drafted her complex revocable trust 5 years ago, meticulously dotting every single E and crossing every, to ensure that our life's work remained an impenetrable fortress against opportunistic vultures. Heavy, torrential rain lashed against the thick, leaded glass of his antique windows, a violent storm brewing outside that perfectly matched the tempest raging within my hollowed-out chest. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked with heavy, measured strokes, slicing the silence into digestible fractions of time. I dropped the dusty blue folder onto his immaculate, sprawling desk. The heavy thud it made seemed to echo in the quiet, climate-controlled room. It was the sound of a judge's gavel falling, of a life being irrevocably altered. My hands, calloused and scarred from decades of structural engineering work and engine grease, felt entirely numb. I stared at my knuckles, noticing the ingrained dirt that no amount of scrubbing could ever fully erase, a testament to a lifetime of building things that were meant to last. "Harold," Arthur said, his gravelly baritone voice laced with immediate deep concern, as he took in my haggard appearance. I had arrived with nothing but the damp clothes on my back, my worn leather wallet, and a heart turned completely to stone. The drive over had been a surreal blur of flashing red traffic lights, hissing tires on wet asphalt, and the rhythmic, hypnotic thumping of broken windshield wipers. Every mile had been a meditation on failure, my failure as a father perhaps, but more acutely, Megan's failure as a human being. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is. Tell me she hasn't done the unthinkable. Execute the protocol." "Artie," I said, my voice dead flat, carrying the sterile chill of a morgue. The searing, blinding pain of my daughter's ultimate betrayal had burned itself out on the punishing drive over, leaving behind nothing but cold white ash and absolute clarity. Megan and Travis demanded rent. They threw Beatrice's memory into black plastic garbage bags. Megan looked me in the eye and told me to leave. Arthur's square jaw tightened, the dense muscles ticking visibly in his weathered cheek. His hands, usually so steady and deliberate, betrayed a slight tremor of pure righteous anger as he flipped open the heavy blue folder. Inside lay the deed, crisp, absolute, and utterly undeniable. The paper was heavy stock, the ink black and final. The house didn't belong to me, not as an individual entity. It belonged to the Beatrice Foster Revocable Trust. I was the sole trustee with absolute unchecked authority over the estate and all its assets. Megan, she was nothing but a contingent beneficiary. A ghost on paper, a name that meant absolutely nothing until my heart stopped beating and I was buried 6 feet under. While I drew breath, she had zero legal claim to a single rusted nail, warped floorboard, or cracked shingle of that sprawling 2-story house. "She actually thought she owned it," I murmured, staring unblinkingly at the polished brass lamp on the edge of the desk, feeling the bitter metallic irony coat my tongue. "She assumed because I paid the mortgage off 15 years ago, because I willingly let them take the master bedroom to save them money while they got on their feet, she assumed it was hers. A kingdom inherited before the king was even in his grave. She forgot who laid every brick of that patio, who hammered every nail into the deck, who bled and sweated for that foundation. My mind drifted back to the evenings spent under the hood of cars, the weekends spent patching the roof, the endless sacrifices Beatrice and I had made to ensure our family had a fortress. We had built a sanctuary, and Megan had turned it into a slaughterhouse. Arthur didn't mince words. His legal mind was already calculating the trajectories of our retaliation. We can evict them through standard channels, Harold. 30 days formal notice. I'll have the county sheriff drag that lazy parasite Travis out by his ear. They won't know what hit them. We can have their belongings placed on the curb by the end of the month. No, I replied, the single word slicing through the heavy air like a sharpened surgical scalpel. 30 days is a grace period. Grace is a luxury reserved for family. I don't have a daughter anymore. I have a squatter. I want the property sold today as is. No inspections, no walkthroughs, no legal disclosures to the current occupants. Find someone who buys the headache, along with the brick and mortar. Someone who doesn't care about playing nice, who specializes in hostile takeovers. A dark, profound understanding glinted in Arthur's eyes. He didn't argue. He knew the depth of my grief and the uncompromising nature of my resolve. He picked up his heavy black desk phone. I know exactly who to call. They are ruthless. 30 minutes later, the heavy oak door swung open, bringing a palpable, biting chill into the room. Miss Sterling didn't just walk. She advanced as the head of aggressive acquisitions for Apex Real Estate Holdings. She was a corporate predator wrapped in a flawlessly tailored charcoal suit. She moved with the silent, calculating grace of a great white shark smelling fresh blood in the water. Her stilettos clicked sharply against the hardwood floor, each step a measured, deliberate assertion of dominance and power. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, unforgiving bun, and her eyes were the color of slate. She took a seat, crossed her long legs, and didn't bother with empty pleasantries or faux sympathy. She reviewed the thick file, her sharp, predatory eyes scanning the property specifications, the lot size, and the neighborhood comps with terrifying mechanical efficiency. It's a prime, oversized lot in a highly desirable, affluent zip code, Sterling said, her voice like grinding ice in a crystal glass. But it's occupied by hostile, uncooperative squatters. That means a protracted eviction headache, potential malicious property damage, and significant legal fees. Market value in pristine condition is $1.2 million. Given the liability, I'll give you $840,000. Cash, 48-hour close, not a penny more. Arthur frowned deeply, leaning forward, resting his forearms on the desk to protest the brutal, insulting lowball offer. But I held up a calloused hand, silencing him instantly. Money meant absolutely nothing to me now. The currency I dealt in was consequences, and consequences were expensive. There's a condition, Miss Sterling, I said, meeting her cold, dead-eyed gaze with my own unflinching stare. You buy it all, the property, the furniture, the vintage appliances. Everything left inside the house and the detached garage. You assume full, undisputed ownership of every single item on that lot, and you take immediate, aggressive possession. No polite warnings, no second chances. She arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, genuine intrigue finally breaking through her impenetrable corporate mask. You're leaving everything on the table? We will liquidate it all. It goes directly to the municipal dump or the wholesale auction block. We don't preserve sentimental attachments. My chest tightened, a momentary, crushing vice grip on my lungs. I closed my eyes and thought of the pristine 1969 Mustang sitting on blocks in the garage. The heavy V8 engine I had meticulously rebuilt with Beatrice, my hands covered in dark, slick grease, her laughing brightly as she handed me a torque wrench, the dusty radio playing old Motown hits into the warm summer night. I thought of my massive collection of first-edition engineering books, a lifetime of accumulated knowledge and passion that Megan was currently treating like useless refuse. It was a staggering, heartbreaking, almost unbearable sacrifice. But keeping those things meant keeping a heavy steel tether to a house that was now hopelessly poisoned. It meant letting Megan think she still had emotional leverage over me. To sever the necrotic infection, a surgeon has to cut away some of the healthy, good flesh, too. I had to let the past die completely so I could bury their stolen future. Everything, I confirmed, my voice never wavering, never cracking, though it cost me a massive, bleeding piece of my soul. You buy the property and its entire contents. You evict the unauthorized squatters using whatever legal force is necessary. The problem becomes yours. The assets become yours. Miss Sterling actually smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing, the thin, bloodless smile of a machine that had just been handed a loaded, untraceable weapon. Deal, Mr. Foster. Apex will take great immense pleasure in clearing the asset. I signed the binding contract right then and there. With the smooth stroke of Arthur's black luxury fountain pen, my cherished home of 40 years became a sterile corporate line item. I felt a strange hollow lightness settle over my tired shoulders. The steel trap was set. The jagged jaws were wide open, waiting for the prey to step inside. While I was checking into an anonymous, depressing, extended-stay hotel downtown, sipping bitter, lukewarm coffee from a flimsy styrofoam cup, the relentless gears of my revenge were quietly, inevitably grinding. The room smelled of industrial bleach and stale cigarette smoke. The hotel room was completely silent, save for the persistent low hum of the mini-fridge. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, feeling the coarse fabric under my fingertips. Outside, a flickering neon sign cast long, distorted shadows across the peeling wallpaper. It was a bleak, temporary existence, a far cry from the warmth I had spent decades cultivating. Yet, in this sterile environment, my mind was sharper than ever. I was no longer a grieving father, I was a predator, but back at the house, pure, unadulterated arrogance was throwing a wild, destructive party. Through the morbid, necessary curiosity of social media, a blank dummy account, I kept solely to monitor the inevitable, spectacular train wreck of my foolish son-in-law's life. I watched their misguided celebration unfold in real time. Travis posted a shaky live video of himself and Megan in my custom-built kitchen, aggressively popping a bottle of cheap, sugary champagne, their faces flushed with unearned, arrogant triumph. Finally got our house back. Travis crowed obnoxiously to his handful of sycophantic followers, wrapping a heavily tattooed arm around my daughter's waist. The boomer is gone, rent-free living, boys, and it's time for a massive, epic upgrade, baby. Homeowners, Crypto King, renovation boss moves. They were completely drunk on a victory that simply didn't exist, proudly standing on a fragile trapdoor they had built themselves with stolen lumber. Believing the sprawling house was their undisputed, permanent property, Travis did what he always inevitably did. He made a colossally stupid, breathtakingly arrogant financial move. Unable to get a traditional, regulated bank loan due to his non-existent credit score and his proud, defiant 2-year stint of chronic unemployment, Travis reached out to the criminal underworld. He contacted Vinny, a local notorious hard money lender, a vicious, unforgiving loan shark who operated out of the dim, smoke-filled back office of a rundown strip club in the industrial sector of the next town over. Vinny didn't care about W-2s, tax returns, or credit checks. Vinny cared about tangible collateral and breaking kneecaps when payments were late. Travis, swaggering into the club with the unearned confidence of a foolish man who thought he held a royal flush, pledged the house he definitively didn't own, as solid backing for a $50 short-term loan to fund their immediate luxury renovations. Vinny, chewing on a stale cigar, handed over the physical cash in a heavy canvas duffel bag, expecting to be paid back with extortionate, bleeding-edge interest within 60 days, or he would simply take the deed and sell it himself. Armed with 50 grand of dangerous mob money and a blinding, toxic sense of entitlement, Megan and Travis didn't wait a single, solitary day. The sudden influx of cash and greed fueled a frenzied, manic, unstoppable wave of destruction. I sat alone in my dim hotel room, watching another live video update on my cracked phone screen, my stomach churning with disgust, but my core resolve hardening into impenetrable diamond. Travis had rented heavy steel sledgehammers and a massive rusted industrial dumpster that now sat in my pristine driveway. I watched, unblinking, as he swung a hammer right through the custom drywall of my bedroom, my quiet sanctuary, the sacred room where I had quietly, desperately grieved for my wife in the dark. "Open concept, baby," Travis yelled wildly at the camera lens, coughing and choking on thick white drywall dust, a manic, unhinged grin plastered on his sweaty face. Megan was in the blurred background, laughing loudly, cheering him on as the solid walls of my life came aggressively tumbling down. They smashed the walls with reckless abandon. They gleefully, violently ripped up the vintage, hand-scraped hardwood flooring. Beatrice had painstakingly picked out herself, tossing the splintered, ruined planks out the window and into the front yard. In their blind, greedy rush to erase my existence from the space and build their tacky, modern crypto-bro paradise, they foolishly brought the heavy ceiling down in the downstairs office. In doing so, they accidentally buried my old, heavy metal filing cabinets, the ones containing the physical, original copies of the trust documents and the vital property records, under hundreds of pounds of shattered plaster, twisted metal framing, and choking debris. They were eagerly tearing down a house they were actively, illegally trespassing in. They were funding this reckless demolition with dirty blood money from a highly dangerous, connected criminal who would not hesitate for a second to put them both in the intensive care unit. And they were doing it all while the true legal owner, a ruthless, multi-billion-dollar real estate conglomerate with a dedicated private security force and a legion of lawyers, was quietly, efficiently finalizing the expedited eviction papers. Watching the glowing screen in the dark, I didn't feel anger anymore. The hot fury had evaporated. I just felt a cold, calculated, surgical satisfaction. They thought they had finally won the war. They thought they had successfully buried the old man and stolen his legacy. But as they swung those heavy steel sledgehammers, laughing like fools in the suffocating dust, they were just digging their own inescapable graves. The hammer had been swung, but the impact had a delay. I sat in my hotel room sipping black coffee, no sugar, no cream, just the bitter heat sliding down my throat. The porcelain cup felt warm against my calloused palms, a stark contrast to the freezing downpour beginning to lash against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my suite. The room itself was a monument to quiet luxury. Dark oak paneling lined the walls, and the scent of expensive leather furniture permeated the air. I didn't need to be in the bank to know what was happening to my daughter and the parasite she married. I knew exactly how it would play out. The gears of my retribution were grinding into motion, precise and inevitable. I had spent my entire life planning, constructing, and fortifying the foundation of my family's comfort, only to watch it be hollowed out by their insatiable greed. This was the reckoning. Travis and Megan, bloated with unearned arrogance, would have walked into the loan officer's cubicle, expecting a routine sign-off to pay back Vinny, the loan shark who had foolishly staked them $50,000 for their vanity renovations. I pictured Travis swaggering into the branch, his chest puffed out under a cheap synthetic suit, reeking of desperation disguised as confidence. Megan would be clutching her counterfeit designer handbag, looking down her nose at the teller, oblivious to the chasm opening beneath her feet. But the title search wouldn't reflect the unearned inheritance they banked on. It would show exactly what I had orchestrated: Apex Real Estate Holdings. The loan officer, a meticulous man with thick spectacles and zero tolerance for fraud, would look at them not as privileged homeowners, but as fraudsters trying to borrow against corporate property. He would explain the reality in cold, bureaucratic terms, his words dismantling their fragile delusions. My phone vibrated on the nightstand. The sharp buzz rattled against the mahogany wood, snapping my attention away from the storm outside. Arthur, a text message, brief and exact. Title search complete. Bank denied, they know. I pictured the color draining from Megan's face, the frantic realization that the ground she stood on had vanished. She had thrown my life in the trash, bagged up my legacy like yard waste. Now she was finding out what happens when you treat the architect of your comfort like dirt. Her breath would catch in her throat, her manicured nails digging into Travis's arm as the loan officer asked them to leave the premises. They would stagger out into the biting wind, the crushing weight of their choices finally bearing down on them. In my mind's eye, I saw them tearing apart the house they had just gleefully demolished. The frantic search, they would be digging through the drywall dust and splintered studs, clawing into the rubble of my ruined office, searching for the blue folder. They would be choking on the plaster particles suspended in the air, their hands blistered and bleeding from the raw debris. Travis would be screaming obscenities, tossing shattered planks of wood aside, desperate to find the lifeline I had severed. They were hunting for a deed that had already been digitized, notarized, and locked in the cold, unfeeling vaults of Apex's legal department. Let them dig until their fingernails bleed. There was nothing left to find. They were excavating their own grave. Friday morning broke with a biting chill. The sky was an unforgiving shade of slate gray, mirroring the concrete reality I had laid out for them. 7 a.m. I was eating a quiet breakfast of eggs and toast when Ms. Sterling executed the next phase. The toast was perfectly crisped, the eggs sunny side up, bursting with rich yolk. I chewed methodically, savoring the silence. She didn't call me. She didn't need to. I had bought her ruthless efficiency, and she delivered. 3 black SUVs pulled into the driveway of what used to be my home. I could almost hear the crunch of the gravel under their heavy tires, the rhythmic thud echoing like the drumbeat of execution. Ms. Sterling, accompanied by private security contractors built like linebackers men with thick necks, tactical vests, and eyes devoid of sympathy, marched to the front door. She bypassed the doorbell and stapled a neon-red eviction notice directly into the mahogany wood. The staple gun clacked with finality. When Travis swung the door open, I knew he wouldn't be thinking clearly. He was a cornered rat, stripped of his bravado and running on pure adrenaline. Arthur later relayed the details to me with a dry amusement. Travis had come out wielding a baseball bat, his knuckles white around the grip, his eyes bloodshot, chest puffed with counterfeit bravado. Miss Sterling didn't even blink. She had faced down hardened executives and boardroom predators. A soft-handed fool like Travis was nothing to her. She stood on the porch in her tailored suit, the morning fog swirling around her ankles, and delivered the killing blow. She informed them they were trespassing on corporate property. Their little renovation wasn't home improvement, it was felony vandalism. The terms of the sale were absolute. They had 72 hours to vacate. They could take the clothes on their backs and nothing else, as every piece of furniture, every appliance, every electronic device had been sold to Apex. Her voice was like crushed ice, chilling and uncompromising. Megan, ever the victim in her own narrative, called the police. She must have shrieked into the receiver, fabricating a story of home invasion. The flashing red and blue lights must have drawn the neighbors to their windows. The officers arrived, hands resting on their belts, ready to defuse a domestic squabble. They walked up the driveway with measured caution, boots splashing in the shallow puddles left by the overnight rain. But Miss Sterling presented the deed, the notarized sale, the cold, hard truth of ownership. The officers turned to Megan, their expressions hardening, and warned her to comply or leave in handcuffs. The law was on my side. It had always been on my side because I respected its parameters. And then, the real consequence arrived. Vinny, the loan shark, had caught wind of the eviction word travels fast when $55,000 of street money is on the line. He pulled up just as the police were pulling out. I could imagine the terror in Travis's eyes as Vinny stepped out of his car, a physical manifestation of the debt they couldn't outrun. Vinny was a massive slab of muscle and scar tissue, a man who dealt in fractured bones and shattered kneecaps. Vinny didn't care about their feelings or their excuses. He wanted his money in 24 hours, and his threats weren't veiled behind corporate jargon. They were visceral, violent. He pointed a thick, calloused finger into Travis's sternum, his voice a low, gravelly growl that promised unimaginable agony. By the time Vinny drove off, the facade of their marriage collapsed. Neighbors watched, from behind drawn blinds, as Megan and Travis screamed at each other in the driveway, viciously turning on one another, tearing apart the last shreds of their pathetic alliance. They were feral dogs fighting over the scraps of a ruined carcass. It was exactly as I had calculated. That evening my phone rang. The caller ID glowed with Megan's name. The harsh white light illuminated the dark contours of my hotel room. I let it ring 4 times. I wanted her to feel the silence. I wanted the anticipation to curdle in her stomach. Finally, I pressed answer and raised the phone to my ear. "Dad," she sobbed. Her voice was thin, ragged, reeking of a desperation that made my stomach turn. There was no apology in her tone, only terror. "Dad, please, you have to cancel the sale. Vinny is going to kill Travis. Just give us half. You got $840,000. We just need enough to pay him off and get an apartment. Please, Dad." I listened to her hyperventilate. For 5 years, I had shrunk myself to fit into the corners of my own home so she could thrive. I had eaten off paper plates in the garage, walked on eggshells in my own living room, and endured the sneers of a son-in-law who hadn't earned a single dime in his miserable existence. For 5 years, I had swallowed her disrespect. I stared out the hotel window at the city lights, my reflection cold and impassive in the glass. The metropolis below was a grid of indifferent illumination, uncaring about the petty squabbles of parasites. "There is no money, Megan," I said, my voice as flat as a concrete slab. "What do you mean there's no money?" she shrieked. Her panic escalated into a frantic wail. "You just sold the house!" I took the $840,000 and purchased a single premium immediate annuity. I explained slowly, letting the financial reality sink its teeth into her. "It's gone, locked away permanently. In exchange, I receive a guaranteed $4,500 a month for the rest of my natural life. There is no lump sum left, there is no trust fund, there is no beneficiary when I die. It all vanishes into the ether, you inherit nothing." The silence on the line was absolute. It was the sound of a parasite realizing the host had died. I could hear the ragged, shallow intake of her breath, as the walls of her entitlement finally collapsed inward. You did this on purpose," she whispered, her voice trembling with hatred. "I gave you exactly what you asked for, Megan. You wanted me out of the house. I'm out. You wanted to be independent. You are." I hung up. I didn't block her number, I just turned off the phone and went to sleep. The sheets were crisp, the mattress firm, and the silence of the room was profound. It was the best rest I had gotten since Beatrice passed. Monday morning arrived, draped in a torrential, freezing rain. Eviction day, I had arranged for a car, a sleek black town car with a hired driver. The engine hummed with a quiet power, insulating us from the tempest outside. Sitting beside me in the warm, leather-scented interior was Eleanor, a bright, fiercely intelligent woman I had met at a widower's support group months ago. She possessed a quiet grace, an unspoken understanding of loss and recovery. We had bonded over shared grief and a mutual love for European architecture. We were on our way to the airport, first-class tickets to Paris, then Tokyo. The itinerary was a mosaic of places Beatrice and I had always meant to visit. Now, I would see them with someone who understood the value of time. I asked the driver to take a slight detour. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. As we pulled onto my old street, the wipers slapping rhythmically against the windshield, I saw the culmination of my life's work and the destruction of theirs. Apex's cleanup crew was merciless. They were hauling out the brand new 85-inch television Travis had bought with Vinny's money and tossing it unceremoniously onto the muddy lawn. The expensive screen shattered against a landscape stone. Designer clothes, ruined by the rain, were scattered across the grass like casualties of war. Silk blouses and Italian leather shoes lay half-buried in the muck. Travis was already gone. When the reality of Vinny's deadline hit, the coward had packed a duffel bag and fled in his leased car to hide at his mother's house, abandoning Megan to face the wreckage alone. He had always been a phantom of a man, present only when the feast was laid out, vanishing at the first sign of a predator. She was standing in the driveway, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her skull. She looked pathetic, ruined. The mascara streaked down her cheeks like black scars. When she saw the town car slow to a stop at the curb, she ran toward it, her shoes splashing in the muddy puddles, her frantic movements mirroring a drowning victim grasping for a lifeline. She slammed her hands against my window, smearing the glass with dirt and desperation. "Dad, please, you can't leave me here. I have nowhere to go." I pressed the button. The window hummed down exactly 2 inches, just enough for the cold, damp air to seep in, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and ruined fabric. I didn't look at her with anger. I didn't look at her with sadness. I looked at her the way you look at a stranger who has bumped into you on the subway. The emotional tether that had anchored me to her for 30 years had snapped. I reached into my breast pocket, pulled out a single folded sheet of thick cream-colored paper, and slipped it through the crack in the window. Megan snatched it with trembling hands, unfolding it in the rain. The raindrops immediately began to warp the heavy stock, smudging the meticulous accounting printed across its surface. "What is this?" she choked out. "An invoice," I said softly, my eyes locking onto hers. $90,000 for 5 years of unpaid rent, utilities, and groceries. Consider it a final lesson. Entitlement is a loan, Megan, and the interest rate is steep, I rolled the window up, cutting off her screams. The heavy glass sealed the cabin, muting her frantic wails into a dull, distant thrum. "Drive," I told the chauffeur. As the car pulled away, the engine purring smoothly, I leaned back into the leather seat and took Eleanor's hand. Her grip was warm and steady. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I had spent 71 years building a life, and the last 5 letting it be dismantled by ungrateful hands. But today, the ledger was balanced. The slate was clean. The rain continued to wash the streets as we headed toward the airport, leaving the wreckage behind. The memories of Beatrice, sweet and unyielding, flooded my mind. She had loved the intricate design of the Japanese gardens we planned to visit, the delicate balance of stone and water. I closed my eyes and pictured the vibrant cherry blossoms falling around us, a stark and beautiful contrast to the sterile ruin I had just left behind. We had sacrificed our youth to build a sanctuary for our family, only to watch it rot from the inside out. Now, as the plane prepared to carry me across oceans, I felt the tremendous weight of that long sacrifice finally lift away. I was finally solvent. I was finally free.